All right, now for intermediate, we have some more modes that we want to talk about. So we have what we call the positional action. Now, again, positional means I might be forcing a position with them. Again, now I might be holding this because I want it in that position. Okay, that is what we call positional. I'm positionally blocking her. I'm not just checking it, I'm actually putting it into a position that I need it to be in. Okay? The other two modes we have are called raking and slicing. Both very, very similar actions. Both tend to go through the target and they're what we call a minor move. A rake usually uses what we call a corrugated edge. So I would rake my back knuckle across like a bony area here. But I could also rake and do different depths of actions with an entire limb or action. So raking is hitting with corrugated, thump, 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 thump. Slicing is when I take like an edge and I just slice, much like having a knife. I'm just going to slice that across. And it's going to be very, very what we'd call vulnerable targets. It's like, oh, that's going to create some sort of response to them. And I'm going to just slice across. So I'm doing this move, slice across eyes, which I don't have to hit the eyes very hard, and I'm just going to slice across. Okay, usually done with fingertips oftentimes is what we slice with. Okay? So those are our modes for intermediate yellow. So now we want to talk about angles. And for intermediate, we have three primary ones. They're very, very similar. So a 45-degree angle is this magical position in which we want to structure the limb and it's fortified. Okay? So if I'm flat here, this is at 0. If I come straight up, that'll be at a 90. And then 45 is right here. Okay? My arm is at a 45-degree angle. So when I'm making contact, if I'm at a 90-degree angle, my muscle structure doesn't really know, do I want my bicep to work or do I want my tricep to work? Well, when I'm striking outward, I need the tricep to be engaged. So that's why I need to go there, because I have the greatest range with my arm, but it's designed to be structurally sound. And ironically, all of when we did a blocking set for advanced yellow, my arm is always at that 45-degree angle. So it is set. And from that comes what we call the 75% power range. So that when I'm striking something, I don't want to be fully extended because I'm going to overextend and could hyperextend my arm, but I don't want to be underextended because I don't have any structure, bone alignment going. We find that it's right at that same almost 45 degree is at my 75-degree power range. That's that optimal range of extension where I'm going to get the greatest. I don't want to be too short. I don't want to be too extended. Kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? I want to have it just right. So the 45 and the 75% power range are almost identically the same thing, except how we're using them. Now the 90 degrees, which I said, hey, I don't want to block at 90 degrees, but when I hit my target, that degree of impact is going to be greatest at 90 degrees. When I hit down on that arm, when I make contact here, if I'm off at an angle, it's going to be glancing. It'll still hurt, but it's not at its maximum effectiveness. For maximum effect, I want a 90-degree perpendicular, or what is actually known as the angle of incident, in which, and for the longest time I kept thinking incident meant by accident, but that is a mathematical formula that they call the angle of incident that is hitting precisely at 90 degrees. So that's why our optimal thing is the angle of incident, which is 90 degrees. Okay? That's for intermediate yellow. All right, so now we want to look at, again, this concept of being simple. And to start with, for now, we're going to look at all of our defensive situations that we're either have a hammering as a primary defense or we're whipping as a primary defense. And we're going to start with the problem of touch. Now we have two triggers. The first trigger is they're touching me because, oh, now I know something's happening. I'm being touched. I respond to the touch. Okay? Eventually, we'll be responding to the reach. But initially, it's best that we start working at, there's the touch. That's what I'm going to defend against. Okay? So we have the hammering defense will be, I hammer. Right? They could touch here. They can touch here. They could touch here. They could touch here. Now, when I get to here, that's going to be really impractical for me to be considering hammering defense there. So when I'm on to the outside, I'm going to whip. And that's why we'll have the whipping defense. So they touch here, I could whip. They touch here, I could whip. However, if they were touching here, I wouldn't want to reach across and whip this way because see how this is going to come across and what we talked about earlier about slicing. I'm going to create or force them to slice me. And I don't want to do that. All right? So with the hammering defenses, we're going to be here, 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 and this is the whipping here. Okay? So that's the simplest setup. And then from there, we're going to have the follow-ups. Now, the simple follow-up is I'm going to hammer and follow up with the lead hand. And we're going to use the hand sword, right? I'm here. I'm going to whip. I'm going to follow up with the lead hand. And again, I'm hammering with the hand sword. Okay? We could also follow up with the elbow. So they're here. I hammer. I could whip with the elbow. Right? I whip. I could hammer in with the elbow as the follow-up. So we want to start looking at, they're here. I whip. Now, my elbow is not in really a position, but I could follow up with the other hand and use the elbow. All right? We're here. I could also use, now, I turn. I have the other opposite hand. I could use the heel palm. So we're going to look at the hand sword, the heel palm, the elbow. Okay? And one of the exercises that we want to work on is what I'm calling the 6 points. So I could hammer, go to point 1. Hammer, go to point 2. Hammer, go to point 3. Hammer, they throw a punt, I go to point 4. Hammer, they throw the back knee, I go to point 5. Okay? And hammer, they kick, I go to point 6. So there are these different dimensions and ranges where, and height zones that I'm looking at. I do the hammer and I follow with the whip and I go to the different target areas. So we'll be working on that with intermediate yellow belt. So the follow-ups that we want to look at for that are, if I'm here, I could follow up with the open hand. All right? If I'm here, I could whip and follow up with the open hand. Now, if I was working on the outside here and I did the, now this hand doesn't really, there's not really much targets for me to follow. So now I could follow up with the backhand and I have, because this is a hammer, I have this coming in and I could use the open heel palm. I could be on the inside. I'm here. Now I could come here, but at the same time I have this opening that I could bring in that opposite hand and I have the heel palm here. I could bring the open hand into the body here. All right? I could also do the same thing. So we want to work the open hand. I could do, again, the hand sword or the heel palm. I then want to look at how I could use the elbow. So they're touching here. I could whip. I could bring in the elbow here. If they were on this side, I might have to whip out this way. Or I could hammer in this way on that, and then work the whipping elbow this way. All right? So I could follow up with the elbow. All right? And then the next thing is we want to start working on some coordination with the legs and working on the balance factor. So they come in, they touch. I hammer here. I could whip, and then I say, oh, I have the opportunity to bring in the knee. The knee is going to be one of my strongest weapons because it's my largest knuckle. So I'm going to start working on how I could use the knee. I'm here, right? And I don't see a follow-up, but there's the knee. I could attack with the knee. So I'm going to have to challenge myself to work balance and still use the knee coming in. Because maybe I'm facing this way, they grab, I turn, I'm here, heel palm, then I have that knee to follow up with. Okay, it's a very powerful weapon, and we want to start working on the balance points. So there's our hammering and whipping defense options for intermediate yellow. All right, so the way we talked a few seconds ago when we were working on the hammering and whipping defenses, we talked that trigger would be touch. So what we want to start associating touch with are two primary, what we call categories of attacks. So with the touch, as that gets more forceful, okay, is she could turn that into a grab. She's not just touching me, she's now actually starting to grab me. All right, and then there could be a certain amount of balance or something that I'm going to have to touch with. She could go in deeper with her touch. No, that was a good grab. And maybe she's holding me, right? So any kind of a hold. A bear hug would be a very deep hold. She's holding me.